Now, to the 41st question. A governmental system in which constitutional supremacy resides in the center is called unitary system of government. Under unitary system or Unitarianism, all governmental, political, and administrative powers are concentrated or centralized or amalgamated or coalesced in the hands of a single central government. So it means if all the governmental powers in a particular state are 100, the entire 100 are centralized in the hands of the central government. A good example of a state practicing unitary system of government is the United Kingdom. United Kingdom is also known as Great Britain. So the answer here is unitary system of government. Now to the 42nd question. A bill is a draft which is awaiting the consideration of the dash. Now, under government, a bill is a proposed law or a law that has not yet been passed. So that actual thing that is being deliberated upon by the legislature, being considered by the legislature before it becomes a law is called a bill. So who considers a bill? The legislature. After it has been considered by the legislature, where will it be forwarded to for approval? It will be forwarded to the executive for approval. And once approval is granted, that bill becomes a law. Now, I'll take it again because the question says for the consideration of the dash. If the question had been like this, that for the approval of the dash, a bill is deliberated and considered by the legislature. And when it has been considered, it will be forwarded to the executive, the president at the federal level and the governor at the state level. So if the president or the executive approves it or signs it into law, it becomes a law. If he signs it in government, we call it assent. So the power of the executive to sign a bill into law is called assent, while the power of the executive to reject a bill is called veto power. Is that clear? So who considers a bill? The legislature. Who approves a bill? The executive. Now to the 43rd question. The private ownership of the means of production is a feature of capitalism. I've said it earlier that private or individual ownership of production is capitalism. State or government ownership of means of production is socialism. Common or collective means ownership of the means of production is communism. So the answer here is capitalism. Now to the 44th question. In a feudal system is feudalism. The two major classes are the serfs and the dash. I told you that under feudalism, practiced in medieval Europe, medieval period refers to the period before industrial revolution in Europe. We have two classes, two categories under feudalism. The upper class known as the lords, nobles or knights. And we have the lower class known as the serfs or vassals. So the serfs from the lower class, the serfs are also known as what? The masses. The serfs are also known as what? The vassals. We don't have elites under feudalism. So the lower class is serfs, while the upper class is what? Lords. Lords are also known as what? Nobles or knights. Now to the 45th question. An example of a country with a flexible constitution is dash. Now, for you to answer this question accurately, you have to have a good grasp of what flexible constitution is. When we say a constitution is flexible, students, it has to be a constitution that can be easily amended. Because if a constitution is difficult to amend, such a constitution is called a rigid constitution. But when a constitution is easy to amend or does not require special procedures for its amendment, it is called what? A flexible constitution. Mind you, students, flexible constitution will go with unwritten constitution, while rigid constitution will go with written constitution. So it suffices to say that almost all written constitutions are rigid and almost all unwritten constitutions are flexible. So a good country practicing unwritten constitution is UK. And if unwritten constitutions will go with flexible, it shows us that UK's constitution will also be what? Flexible. So the answer here is United Kingdom. And another word for United Kingdom is Great Britain. Now to the 46th question. The rule of law is a negation of dash. You have to know this, students, that what is negation? Negation is from the word negative or negativity. So negative means against something or something that does not align with what we have been discussing. So which option from amongst these options can go against the rule of law? Equality before the law is under rule of law. Supremacy of the law goes with rule of law, because rule of law has to do with the law ruling over everybody in the land. Rule of law was propounded by an English philosopher called Professor Albert Van Dicey. And he gave us 3 cardinal principles of the rule of law. Supremacy of the law, equality before the law, also called impartiality, and fundamental human rights, also called personal liberty. So equality, supremacy, they go with rule of law. Now limited power. Limited power is also associated with rule of law, in that once the law is ruling over everybody in the land, the powers of the government will be limited. It shows that they cannot be dictatorial. They cannot go beyond their powers because the Constitution has limited their powers. Now, we are left with absolute power. Absolute power cannot, in any sense, go with rule of law. How can the law be ruling and somebody under the law also possess absolute power? It is quite impossible. So the answer here is absolute power. Now to the 47th question. To ensure the rights and freedom of citizens, the powers of the arms of government must be separated. Now, what are the arms of government? They are also the organs of government. They are also the branches of government. They are also the institutions of the state, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Is that clear? So, the person making a law should not be the one to also settle disputes. Because what if I make a law and I breach it? Will I also be the one to come and resolve disputes? I can't be fair in such an instance. So, it is expedient and good under separation of powers that a separate entity should make laws, another entity called executive should implement laws, while another entity called judiciary should do what? Interpret laws. Now to the 48th question. Delegated legislation is made by bodies other than the dash. I told us that any law made by the legislature is called legislation, while any law made by non-legislative bodies is called delegated legislation. So, is the president under the legislature? Delegated legislation is made by non-legislative bodies. So, since the president is not under the legislature, he can make delegated legislation. The governor is not under the legislature, he can make delegated legislation. The judiciary is not under the legislature. They can make delegated legislation. But parliament is another word for legislation. So, the parliament cannot make delegated legislation. You can't make a law that you are delegating to someone. Anybody that will make a delegated law will be those that it has been delegated for to make. So, the legislature or the parliament, they make laws. Laws made by other bodies are called delegated legislation. Now to the 49th question. The right of citizens to participate in the affairs of government of their country is called political rights. Now to the 50th question. The commission charged with the conduct of elections in Nigeria. Now guys, it depends on when this question was asked. Currently it is INEC. Now let me take us through history. There was a federal election in 1959, okay? That election was conducted to choose people that would be in the legislature. Which electoral body conducted the 1959 federal elections? That was ECN, Electoral Commission of Nigeria. And in 1964, there was another election conducted by FEC, Federal Electoral Commission, 1964. Which electoral body? FEC. Federal Electoral Commission. Who was the electoral chairman? Dr. Eyo Esua, who was the Labour leader then. In 1979, when the military left power, another electoral body called FEDECO organized the elections in 1979. Who was the electoral chairman then? Eme Awa was the electoral chairman in 1979, and the electoral body then was FEDECO, Federal Electoral Commission. 4 years after, the same Fedeco conducted elections in 1983, but the electoral chairman had changed from Emehawa to Justice Victor Obiewiski in 1983. Now, we had some electoral chairmen that didn't spend too long periods in office. We had Ame Ebute, but let us come to 1993. In 1993, our electoral body was NEC, National Electoral Commission. 1993, NEC, National Electoral Commission, conducted in 1993 presidential elections. Who was the electoral chairman? Professor Humphrey Nwosu. Then in 1999, our electoral body had changed to INEC, Independent National Electoral Commission, for the 1999 elections. Now, headed by who? Justice Ephraim Akpata. 4 years after, in 2003, there was another election coordinated by INEC. The head of the Electoral Commission then was Dr. Abel Gobadia. 4 years after, in 2007, conducted by the same INEC, and the head of the commission then was Professor Maurice Iwu. 4 years after, in 2011, the same INEC, led by Professor Atahiru Jega. 4 years after, in 2015, same INEC, Professor Atahiru Jega. And then in 2019, and in this same 2023, also INEC, led by Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. Now to our 51st question. Which of the following is not an appointed member in the Yoruba Pre-colonial Society? Now students, the Yoruba Pre-colonial Society has to do with the Oyo Empire, okay? So, who amongst these 4 options was not appointed? The Oyo Mesis, they were appointed. The Shamu, the Bashorun, and so on and so forth. The Ogboni, they were appointed. The Oyo Mesi were the legislative arm. The Ogboni were the judicial arm. The Are Ona Kakanfo, who was the army commander of the Oyo Empire, was appointed by the Alaafin. The only person who was not appointed was the Aremo. So he functions as the Aremo, not because of appointment, but by virtue of being the first son of the incumbent Alaafin. Mind you, the Aremo does not become the new Alaafin if the Alaafin dies. He used to be the heir to the throne, but it was discovered by the Oyo Mesis that many Aremons, they facilitated the early demise of Alaafins. So a new law was promulgated then that an Aremo would only assist his father to manage the affairs of the kingdom, but once the Alaafin dies, the Aremo would die with the Alaafin. Is that clear? So the Aremo was not appointed. He only functions as Aremo by virtue of being the first son of the Alaafin. Now to the 52nd question. The Ibadan 1950 conference led to the birth of, we have the Clifford Constitution of 1922, drafted by Sir Hugh Clifford. And after Clifford, we had 2 colonial governors that came. We had Cameron and we had Bernard Bodilon, but their stay was short-lived. And so in 1939, Otto Richard was transferred to Nigeria to become our colonial governor, and then he drafted the Richard Constitution of 1946. Is that clear? And it was within the confines of the Richard Constitution of 46 that Nigeria was divided into 3 regions. Now, don't be confused. Did we start practicing federalism as a result of 46 Constitution? No. But was Nigeria divided into 3 regions as a result of 1946 Constitution? Yes. And division of the country into regions, is it a part of federalism? Yes. But we did not start practicing federalism by virtue of the 46 Constitution. So when Otto Richard left, John Macpherson came, and he intended to draft a better and a richer and a more inclusive and more participatory constitution in 1951. So he went around the country in 1950 and organized a conference in Ibadan whereby certain conclusions were reached. And this Constitutional Conference of 1950 was going to be like a prelude to the Constitution of 1951 called Macpherson Constitution. Now to the 53rd question. The collective ownership of property is a feature of dash. Now there are 2 concepts, students, that could confuse you in government: communism and communalism. Now let me break them down into pieces. Communalism has to do with landed property. Okay? So if a question comes out that the collective or common ownership of landed property, that is communalism. It was practiced in Tanzania under President Julius Nyerere, who is often described as the father of communalism. So mind you, common or collective ownership of landed property. Now, what of communism? Communism is also common or collective, but it is not about landed property. It is common or collective ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. So communism has been practiced in Vietnam, in Cuba, in China, in Russia, and so on and so forth. So the answer here is communalism, since it's about landed property. Now to the 54th question. The three political parties that were registered by INEC at the inception of the Fourth Republic, you know, when General Abdusalam Abubakar came into power, following the death of General Sani Abacha in 1998, he promised that he was going to spend just a year in office and he will hand over to civilians and that elections will be conducted. So he mobilized the country towards drafting a new constitution. And three political parties were recommended by the 1999 constitution. We had the AD, Alliance for Democracy. We had the PDP, People's Democratic Party. And we had the APP, All People's Party. But two parties presented candidates for the election. PDP presented former General Olusegun Obasanjo, now Chief Olusegun Obasanjo as of 1999, while AD and APP came together to present a candidate called Chief Olufalaye. So PDP presented Olusegun Obasanjo and Atiku Abubakar as his vice, while AD/APP presented Chief Olufalaye and Umaru Shinkafi as his vice. So the three parties that participated in the 1999 elections at the inception of the Fourth Republic were AD, PDP, and APP. Now to the 55th question. The Danjuma Commission of 1988 was one of the several measures put in place to address Dash. Now you have to know General Theophilus Danjuma was the chief of army staff from 1975 to 1979 under General Olusegun Obasanjo. And in 1988, he was called out of retirement to oversee a lingering issue in the Nigerian federalism called resource control. Are you getting me now? How our revenues are being derived and how they will be allocated to the different entities that make up Nigeria. The federal, the state, the local, and the different entities that make up Nigeria. So the Danjuma Commission of 88 looked into the issue of revenue allocation. They allocated 50% to, recommended 50% for the federal, 30% for states, and so on and so forth. Now to the 56th question. Africa as the centerpiece of Nigerian foreign policy was formulated as a result of Dash. You have to know that it was during the regime of Abubakar Tafawa Balewa as the prime minister that he gave the famous speech that henceforth Africa will occupy the first place in Nigeria's foreign policy. And many factors contributed to this. The first factor that contributed to it was the size and population of Nigeria. Nigeria, being the most populous country in Africa with the largest population, found it incumbent upon her to champion the cause of decolonization and racism in Africa, that they were going to ensure that the matters of Africa will be pivotal to the national and foreign policy of Nigeria. So the answer that comes closest, the option that comes closest to the answer here is option A, the geographical location, size, and population of Nigeria. Now to the 57th question. Nigeria in the Second Republic practiced Dash. Second Republic started in 1979, ended in 1983, and we started practicing a presidential system of government in the Second Republic. Now, what is a presidential system of government? It's a system of government in which the head of state is also the head of government, which means we will have one head of state, who also doubles as the head of government, and that is unicephalous executive, option B. Now to the 58th question. Local government was recognized as the third tier of government in Dash. This question is very tricky. Under General Olusegun Obasanjo in 1976, the local government reforms came into being, and these reforms recommended local government to be the third tier of government. Mind you, recommended. They recommended, but it had not yet come into effect because there was no constitution. You have to know that military governments, they rule by decrees. So, but they were going to leave power in 79. So they had brought in place local government reform that will recommend local government to be the third tier of government. That was in 76. Now, when the Constitution of 1979 came into place, the recommendation of 76 local government reforms now came into effect by virtue of the 1979 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So, which law recommended local government reforms of 76? Which law recognized 1979 Constitution? Now to the 59th question. Republicanism is synonymous to, now I've said a republic is a state ruled by an elected citizen. A period, a dispensation in which citizens freely elect their leaders. So that aligns with the concept of democracy. Now to the 60th question. The Akimi in the Hausa Fulani pre-colonial system means dash. The Akimi in the Hausa Fulani system was the head of the district, while the Shugaban Kauye was the head of the village. This brings us to the end of this government session. It is my expectation and desire that we are better strengthened and